You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansell. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to another event from the Product Coalition. I'm Jay Stansell, your host, and today we're diving into the future of Web3 with Rowland Graus, a trailblazer in blockchain innovation. We're going to be exploring how chain abstraction is breaking barriers, making cross-chain communication seamless, and revolutionizing user experiences. So Rowland, with his unique expertise in finance and tech, is going to unravel how platforms like Agoric are leading this charge. So get ready to understand how these advances empower developers and reshape the Web3 landscape. Rowland, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to this session because it's unique. I've never gone this deep on a podcast in the world of Web3. I'm a little bit intimidated by it, but I'm sure we're going to have a good one.
Thanks for having me on.
So today's episode, Rowland, is all about breaking blockchain barriers. It's about chain abstraction and the future of Web3. For those that aren't close to Web3 technologies and where we're at, do you mind just explaining some of these concepts before we go deep and really get into it?
Yeah, happy to. And I think before I even define chain abstraction, I think it's probably worth taking a moment to talk about what does the Web3 ecosystem look like today? Because especially if you're someone that's outside the space, you're probably unaware of most of this. In the last, call it 3 to 4 years, we've gone from a world where most applications and assets that users hold and interact with being from most of those being on the Ethereum ecosystem alone to those being distributed across hundreds of different blockchains and literally hundreds. And those are both what's called layer twos on the Ethereum ecosystem. There are other blockchains like Solana that many folks may be familiar with. There are smaller blockchains on the Cosmos ecosystem that are dedicated to individual applications. All of those are their own chains that run. And so in this new world where if you want to interact with these decentralized applications, you actually need to move your assets. You need to go to different front ends to deal with different applications. You need to move assets across. And it's a very complex world. It's become a very complex world, even for expert end users to deal with. And you know, I'm someone that I work in this space professionally. I've been a holder of blockchain assets since 2017. I'm deep in this world, and even I have a lot of difficulty navigating the space sometimes. You know, we imagine what it's like for folks that are coming in here new. And so that's sort of setting the stage of what the ecosystem looks like. Chain abstraction is the recognition of this as a problem within the space and an approach to dealing with this problem such that end users that come into the space don't need to be experts in order to navigate it. And you know, a basic idea is you should be able to come in, purchase the assets that you want to purchase, hold them where you want to hold them, and interact with any applications that you want, and not necessarily have to know all the details about what blockchain you're interacting with or how to move between blockchains any more than you know which internet backbone provider is sending your internet packets. So I'll stop there for now, but that's the basic idea behind chain abstraction.
Nice. The analogy that really came to mind for me when researching this topic in preparation for today, Rowland, was when I think back to the early 2000s, if not late 90s, when it came to booking online travel through an interface. All of the interfaces were completely different, and it was incredibly confusing to book complex trips. Whether it was holidays or flights, every interface was completely different. Patterns weren't standardized. UX as a practice was still being formalized. And so over time, we've seen the likes of Google Flights or Expedia start to standardize interactions and make it easier for you to access multiple things through one front door. Would that be a similar analogy as to what you're talking to today?
It certainly has challenges that are exactly analogous to that. The analogy that we actually use, which is coincidentally also travel related, is we're often when we're speaking at a conference or something like that, we'll say, okay, how many of you had to book a flight to come to this conference? Half the conference raises their hand, and then how many of you had to transfer money from your bank account to your airline's bank account before you were able to book that flight? That's the analogy right now, which is if I want to interact with this application on some other blockchain, I've got to move my money over to that chain before I do it as a separate step. Nobody wants to do that, right? You want to just click a button on an application and have the whole thing work underneath the hood. And that really is sort of the direction that the industry is going, and that Agoric is pushing forward.
Okay, keeping us rooted in the fundamentals, Web3 is something that can be perceived different ways. Could you just guide me through what does Web3 mean to you in 2024 going into 2025?
Yeah, and so there's a lot of ways to answer that question. Fundamentally, to me, the difference in Web3 is actually being able to directly own the assets that you are holding, right? You're not interacting with a broker that holds your assets for you and gives you a front end that tells you you've got them. You have direct proof that, yes, if I'm holding USDC, that is my representation of a dollar on chain. If I'm holding the build token, which powers Agoric, that is my representation on chain. Nobody can take that away from me. And I may choose to work through a custodian because that simplifies my life if I want to do that, but I have the ability at all times to take back ownership of that. And then critically, and I think this is sort of digging into when the Web3 light bulb went off for me personally, when I'm interacting with a decentralized application, I am not sending my money somewhere else such that I can do it. So think about like moving from E-Trade to a Fidelity account, where the first step there would be like, okay, I've got to request a check from E-Trade and then go deposit it in Fidelity, and maybe I'm waiting 7 business days or something like that. It's no, I have my assets, I control them, and I connect to an application which can then see my assets and construct transactions for me. And so I'm bringing my assets to these different applications rather than having to send them there and have them hold them for me. And so that, to me, that is Web3. And so when you're interacting with a Web3 application, it's just software. It's software that tells a blockchain how to operate and how to do operations on your assets, but you still hold them, you control them, and you're sort of not at the whim of some individual third party that can decide to take them away from you, decide to shut down your account, decide to do anything.
Okay. So let's go the next level down then, Rowland. So specifically from Agoric, you've got an orchestration API that is designed to simplify all of this. Can you talk me through the how this solution solves that problem that you've been talking to?
Yeah, and so I think, keep me honest here. I want to do this in 2 parts. The first part is I want to talk about our approach to the problem, and then I want to talk about how the orchestration API actually does that. So I set up the ecosystem as being many disparate chains that have capabilities and assets scattered across them. Users want to interact with all of those different assets and capabilities. There is sort of this fundamental important thing that exists in the blockchain world, which is there are security trade-offs between chains. There are different reasons to operate on different chains, and so it's not that these are all totally fungible things. They operate differently. They have different security properties, and so we don't want chain abstraction to make that commoditize all those things, and then effectively you end up on the cheapest blockchain at all times, and maybe that's made a bunch of security trade-offs that you actually wouldn't be comfortable with as a user. That's not the goal. Is not to say all the chains are the same and the user never needs to care or know, or that nobody should be making good choices. The goal is to allow developers and application builders to make those responsible choices on behalf of the users that they intend to serve. And so that is sort of the core distinction. Is as we go towards a chain abstracted world, a certain application that maybe you're just doing micropayments to friends for whatever purpose, maybe you don't care too much about, like, it's more important to you that that chain is extremely fast, or that the assets are extremely available to you, or that certain kinds of assets are available. May not be as important to you that it has never ever been hacked. Maybe you're fine with it getting hacked once every 10 years or something along those lines, right? Whatever that trade-off ends up being, it should be the application builders that make those decisions. And what chain abstraction, or what Agoric wants to do with orchestration, is allow the developers of those applications to much more easily manage this world and to make those choices on behalf of their users in the way that they feel comfortable with, and that the users that actually will dig in and understand the details will feel comfortable with as well. And so that's our approach. What the orchestration API actually does is with Agoric, you are writing smart contracts in JavaScript. So you don't need to learn Solidity, you don't need to learn Rust, these languages that have much smaller developer bases. We are pure JavaScript. You write your contracts that way. And when you want to operate with a different chain, all you do is say get chain Osmosis, or get chain Ethereum, or get chain Solana, and you receive an object that represents that chain and all of the actions that you can do on that chain. And I won't go deeper into it than that, but that's the goal, is to make it extremely simple for developers to operate across chain and to give them a set of sort of uniform capabilities that they can do to make transfers, to create accounts, to handle user assets, to interact with contracts or applications on those other chains very straightforwardly. So the goal basically is that Agoric becomes the best place to build and deploy your business logic for your application, and wherever that application needs to operate.
Nice. So then when it comes to achieving that interoperability, what are some of the challenges the developers may face? Or is it just purely working with one API and it is going to work as easy as that? Or are there chain-based problems along the way that they will also need to overcome?
Yeah, so the goal is effectively that Agoric is coming across those problems first and solving them for developers quickly. I expect, and there will sort of always be the new chain that just came out, or the long tail chain or application that hasn't quite made it into the official API yet, or something along those lines. And so as a developer, you might need to sort of roll some of your own transactions or figure out some of this ahead of where the Agoric orchestration API has gone. The reality is it's hard. And so the goal for us is to say, okay, we're going to take on this pain. We, Agoric Opco, writing the software for the Agoric orchestration API, we will take on this pain for you and then make it easy. And so the things that we have made easy will be easy for you. If we haven't made it easy yet, but you need it right now, you can work with us, come to us. We can at least teach you the lessons that we've learned along the way, or you can do it on your own. That certainly does work. But the goal is that we can maintain this sort of consistent API across chains, and that over time it comes to encompass everything relevant that's out there in the space. And so from our perspective, I think if we get to like 5 to 7 chains, that probably covers 80% of the activity. And then there's sort of this long tail that will persist forever, that we'll have to continue moving towards.
Okay, well, I've got to lean into the product management of this a little bit more.
Sure, yeah.
So for most software product managers, you're managing your backlog, you're working through, you get the occasional bug come up, you reprioritize around those things. Maybe you get legal and compliance curveballs come that aren't planned. But in your world, you've got APIs that you're not in control of, changing at dates that you're not in control of. How do you prioritize in a way that doesn't drive you insane?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to answer in a way that doesn't drive me insane. I'm not sure I've actually succeeded there. I at one point I actually did a presentation on how product management in blockchain differs from B2B SaaS, which is my background before this. And there's a lot of ways. I think to your specific question, a challenge and something that is actually beneficial for us in the blockchain space is that many product managers are used to the idea that, okay, I'm working on 2-week sprints, and at the end of that sprint I'm going to release, and I push button and it's in mainnet, right? Or mainnet, it's in production. And if you've got a bug, push button, then you can fix it, right? We can't operate that way. Our deployment process, and this is a long-winded way of getting to your question, but the deployment process for a chain like Agoric is, okay, we're code complete, let's say on a Friday on, October 1st or something along those lines. Then it goes to our DevNet. Then it goes to our staging environment, which is a mainnet-like blockchain that is run by a set of third-party validators that are around the world, which is them practicing the upgrade. And so that testing will go on for maybe 1 to 4 days. And then we have a governance proposal where token holders vote on the upgrade to the chain, which again, Agoric Opco doesn't control the chain. We actually don't even run a node. We just write software and we say, hey, this upgrade is the next thing on the roadmap. If you like it, please go ahead and upgrade, but they have to vote and choose to go. And so that takes 3 days. And then there's the upgrade where the chain goes down and everybody walk in. And so all that is to say, it's a long process to get from code complete to something out in production. And it means that we have to be a lot more careful with not shipping bugs because you can't use the move fast and break things kind of thing, because when something's broken, it's broken for a little while. But that also means that when we're looking at external changes, we have that window too, right? And so you mentioned APIs changing on us on the other end. I'm actually a little less concerned about that piece because we see those governance proposals, we see the conversation that goes into making those changes, and there's actually quite a long window where we'll get a bunch of heads up around that changing underneath our feet. So that's manageable, but there are sort of a lot of unique product elements to working in this space that are challenging.
Part of my career has been in fintech, and as a VP of product in this space, I went through a PCI Tier 1 compliance process because we're handling dollars. Every cent has to add up. What you're talking to, you can't go fast and break things. When you're handling money, you need complete assurance. In your world, what's the equivalent of PCI compliance for handling money so that you've got the assurance that every cent makes it to every location it should be in a way that is independently verifiable?
The answer is there are a variety of third-party audit firms that basically, this is their whole business, right? They come in and they say, for a given protocol, we're going to go audit the code, make sure there are no high risk security vulnerabilities. They publish the reports and all that stuff. Agoric goes through that too. The challenge fundamentally is that's not foolproof, right? And ultimately, whereas in a lot of finance, if something goes wrong, transactions can get reverted. There's someone on the back end that can ultimately say, no, we didn't really want to do that. We're gonna, let's roll it back a few days or something along those lines. Can't do that in blockchain. And so, this is why the industry consistently sees large hacks that actually can't be fixed. Is there is a disparity in audit firm capability. No audit, regardless of how good the auditors are, is ever going to catch everything. And so there are these challenges. And so I will say one of Agoric's actual major differentiators is the way security and system access is partitioned makes it much harder to have system-wide bugs either on the chain or within a contract. And we actually spent a couple of years trying to market ourselves on that capability, and it turned out that just like the industry didn't care, and so we kind of had to go with it. We had to change our messaging such that wasn't so central, but it is actually a major differentiator that again, I can never say and would never say that you can't write a bug on Agoric. You absolutely can, but there are a lot of deeply embedded security features on the chain that make it much harder to make that kind of mistake as a builder. And so, to answer your question, there is no assurance. If you're interacting with a Web3 protocol, the best assurance you have that it is not going to get hacked is how many assets are there and how long have they been there. If you've got a protocol that's got $5 billion in assets and it's been running for 3 years, like Aave on Ethereum, that thing is getting hacked every single day, or somebody is trying to hack it every single day, and nobody has succeeded yet. That's the best assurance you're going to get.
The bigger the bank, the more likely it is to be robbed.
Yeah.
Is that those principles, how do they overlap with reliability in terms of ensuring uptime, availability, etc.?
Yep.
Is it similar?
Yeah. So for the way the Agoric chain works, uptime and reliability of a chain is dependent on the validator set. So we have an independent set. The chain has an independent set of 100 validators that at any given time are processing transactions, and it's their machine's uptime that actually determines the chain in large part. And some of them can go down or have miss time, and they actually lose money during that period. So there's economic security around ensuring uptime of the chain. And then there are challenges, especially with like a new virtual machine like Agoric. There are transactions that come in that just didn't get tested the right way on performance, and all of a sudden you see the chain slow down, and so we have to deal with that as well. None of that is a security vulnerability in the sense that it's not users losing funds, but reliability of the chain and uptime of the chain matters quite a bit, especially if you're holding assets in a lending position and the market is fluctuating. You can't have the chain go down because you need to be able to manage those assets and pull them out if things go wrong. That happened to Solana in 2021, where it was down for like 19 hours or something like that, and it came back up, and prices were radically different, and so everybody lost a bunch of money as a result. But it's a constant concern, and so chains certainly spend quite a bit of money, including salary and third-party audits, on ensuring that we have security folks reviewing things. We're doing performance testing. We're doing all this stuff.
Okay, let's bring it back to the user experience. I mean, what are some of the most common use cases you're seeing? I imagine Agoric can be used in many different ways due to the style of product it is. It's almost like a marketplace in terms
Right.
of you're taking a whole heap of inventory and making it available to others. What are the common use cases, and how is Agoric helping the user experience?
Yeah. So really, when you look at what has succeeded in the space so far, and it shouldn't be surprising, it started with people holding financial assets and not doing anything with them. That's effectively what Bitcoin is. And then it moved into people using those assets in financialized arrangements. And so lending protocols, stablecoin minting protocols, trading protocols, futures options. This sort of financialization of the space was the first thing that really took off, because that's what people had, and that's what people had things to do with, right? And so there are other parts of the industry that are starting to emerge over the last couple of years, but really what's called DeFi is decentralized finance is the primary thing that people do in the space still. When I look at Agoric and what I expect or hope that people will build with orchestration, is there are all these opportunities that have emerged as a result of blockchains being siloed. And so an easy example to explain is there might be a lending protocol in the Cosmos ecosystem where you're able to borrow USDC, which is the sort of tokenization of a dollar, at 5%. And then there might be a lending protocol in Solana where you can lend that out at like 40%, right? And again, the amounts that you could do aren't high enough that you're going to see like JP Morgan come in, but for an individual user, that's highly attractive, right? You could probably put $5,000 or $10,000 in there without moving the rates at all. And so I think there's a lot of low-hanging opportunities like that, which will probably be the first use cases for orchestration, because it'll be the first time that on-chain smart contracts can very easily move assets cross-chain, automatically rebalance, react to them in that way. Down the road, ultimately what we are building actually is a new category of blockchain applications, which can run continuously and not be constrained to a single block and not be constrained to one chain. Ultimately, I expect a whole new category of things to emerge. I'm not quite sure what that is yet, in the same way that, if you had asked folks in 2016 what's going to work on Ethereum, nobody would have really known the answer. And I think that that's sort of where we're at here too, where I want to see a lot of experimentation, and I'm curious to see what people can build with these new capabilities beyond sort of the obvious low-hanging fruit stuff. But I fully expect there's like years worth of low-hanging fruit that could get mined profitably using Agoric orchestration.
Nice. One of the things that struck me when back 2016, 2017, as it really come to the forefront around crypto and blockchains, and the tech was being considered by enterprises, etc., was the global access it opened up, the ability for it to be a genuine global product. How is Agoric leaning into that global accessibility to ensure devs all around the world are able to take advantage of a product like this?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of challenges as a product manager in the space that are somewhat unique, and one of them is just it's inherently global, right? I mentioned we've got 100 validators for the chain. Um, I Many of them are in other parts of the world, and that means that coordination can sometimes be challenging. We don't lead the coordination, and so it's one of our most active contributors as a validator. It's just a one-man shop, like somewhere in Eastern Europe. Like I got no idea who that guy is. If he decides to stop doing it tomorrow, like that's actually a gap. And so decentralized systems end up having those kinds of components. But yeah, a lot of the product teams that we talk to are in Asia or elsewhere in the world, and that's just a constant fact of life. And so that's true for the whole space and not unique to Agoric. I think for me, what blockchain will offer as it continues to sort of mature into deeper industries, and the sort of financialization speculation stuff that has built up so far kind of distributes a little bit more broadly, is making markets out of things that were sort of stranded or not quite well managed or not globalized in a way that would have made them significantly more efficient. You could think of like supply chain finance and things like that, where you could have markets for considerably more assets than we currently do. Most of those, I think, will frankly be on chain because it is just easier to build that. It's instantly global. It's instantly accessible to anybody. There's lots of liquidity that can pour into good financialized ideas. And so that's really what the space brings. What I think Agoric brings to that is our unique model around composability of objects. And what I mean by that is, and we're going to get a little bit into sort of deeper blockchain stuff here, but on Ethereum or similar systems, when you have a balance of a token, actually what that is a contract that is running on the Ethereum chain, which says, Rowland's address and 10 next to it, right? It's a table. It's a table of addresses and balances. And so when those things need to update, it's the contract that just changes. And if I send one to you, it will say deduct one from Rowland, give one to Jay. That ends up not composing super well across a whole bunch of, if you want to start using that asset in new places, that can sometimes be challenging. And so this is why, for users of Uniswap or other Ethereum protocols, that's why you have to do that approval transaction, because there is this like extra step you have to do to say, oh, I want to use my balance that's on this thing somewhere else. That starts to become a problem as you get into these more complicated scenarios. With Agoric, it's actually fundamentally different. It is when I am holding an asset, if I have 10 of an asset, there's an object that's being held by a contract that is mine that I move around to other people. And so it's sort of this like bearer asset kind of model where if I give it to you, you can then go and do whatever you want with it without having to have separate approval steps. And so when we talk about more of the world sort of globalizing and creating markets for new things, I think that difference is going to matter considerably. And this isn't something that Agoric spends a lot of time talking about, because for the use cases that exist right now, it hasn't mattered yet. For the use cases that will exist in 5 years, it will matter considerably, I think.
So talking about the next 5 years, I do want to get into the future of Web3 with you, but right now, whenever we talk about Web3 products, the word regulation with a question mark pops up. And so what risks does regulation impose on you in where we are right now? Because I appreciate this is a fast moving space.
Yeah, and so this gets back to like unique challenges as a PM in this space. The practical answer is you end up spending a lot more time talking to lawyers than you probably want, right? And legal becomes part of the product design in a way that I doubt it is in many other places. And so that's challenging. When I think about how it has truly impacted my work personally over the past 3 years, it's the level of uncertainty in the space is just I continue to be shocked by it, right? It's not that, oh, I want to do this thing that's illegal. It's I want to do this thing. I think it should be legal. I don't know that it's legal, and nobody else does either, right? The lawyers don't know, politicians don't know. You get different guidance from different federal agencies, and so it's like this gray area where if I could just say, oh well, I can't do that thing, I'm going to move on, then that would be a lot easier than being like, okay, well, it would be really beneficial to do this thing, and so I'm going to keep pushing on this thing, but I get this vague pushback, and I think I shouldn't, but I'm not quite sure. And that is just very draining and difficult. And so I will say a lot of the space is really just wants that to be over so that you can, at least make decisions and move on, right? And so that ends up being a big part of it. I will say, as someone that's been in the space, at least personally, since 2017, it's pretty wild to have it be a topic as part of the presidential election and things like that. That I never expected that. So I guess we'll see what happens. I expect that the industry will get clarity on a bunch of these important topics over the next couple of years. I think it would be hard for it to continue in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I personally see a lot of similarities between this and when I think back to the internet in the mid 90s. If you think back to like university and education institutions, it was like, no, don't use the internet, don't use computers, go to the library, study. And then it was intranet. So, okay, you can use it, but it needs to be within this walled garden so you don't
Right.
hurt yourself or anyone else. And then we overcome that with maturity and time and regulation, and
Right.
using the internet as part of a study of practice was common and normal. So it feels like with these things, they can't be uninvented. You can't uninvent blockchain and remove it. It's always going to be there. It's just where do we put the wall around the garden hasn't quite been worked out. And should there be a wall at all?
Yeah, you can't uninvent it, but it turns out that if you wanted to, you could probably send everybody to prison. And so, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's park the regulation and look forward into the future. So, what do you see is the future of chain abstraction in the broader Web3 landscape, and how's that going to help move all of this forward and help everyone work out how to benefit from Web3?
Yeah, and so I think that over the next few years, chain abstraction will just happen. It will, from the perspective of an outsider to the space, all of a sudden it will be a lot easier to interact with Web3 applications. And so the goal is that, an end user should never have to think about chain abstraction. Chain abstraction is a term for people in the space that recognize a problem and are building to solve that problem. And so if that's not what has happened, if you're a user in 2027 and you're coming in and you have to think about chain abstraction, then we failed. From the perspective of the teams that are working on it, there are a bunch of different elements of chain abstraction that all kind of have to come together to solve the problem. One is being able to use, just at the total end user side of things, being able to use the same wallets across many different blockchains, or to create an account on one chain that then allows you to operate sort of connected in some way accounts across all sorts of other chains. There's bridging technology that has to come together. And, we were talking about hacks earlier. A lot of the early hacks were on just insecure bridges. That has gotten a lot better over the last 2 or 3 years. That's tech that Agoric makes use of, and we partner with those teams. But, I have no desire to build a bridge myself. It's a hard thing to do. But that has gotten a lot better. And then there also needs to be sort of integrations to front ends. And so what I mean by that is, if you go to the Aave application or Marginfy and Solana or something like that, the question is, what assets can you see? Can you only see your assets that are tied to the account that you connect on the chain that is deployed on? Or do they make the active choice to say, okay, I want my user to be able to see all of their assets and deposit and interact with any of them? And so all of that is going to kind of come together. There are also, off-chain solutions that sort of help solve problems for users in secure ways. And so, when we think about the industry, we see a bunch of players that are all kind of trying to solve the same end user problem, but coming at it from different perspectives. And I think Agoric ends up having a very unique approach to this that is enabled by our our actual differentiation, which is the ability for and this is sort of explaining orchestration and what we really can do. The difference between an Agoric contract and a contract on any other blockchain is that it can continue operating after a block has passed. So a user signs a transaction, and instead of signing a transaction that only specifies what they need to happen in that block, they can sign a transaction that specifies a whole flow of activity that they don't have to interact with again until it's done. And so that flow of activity can be blockchain sends a message to another chain, gets a response, sends a message to a different chain, gets a response. And those responses could be weeks later. You could be depositing into a lending protocol, waiting for something to occur, and then withdrawing out. You specify all that in a single transaction, and the contract just operates for you. That is just fundamentally different than any other chain in the space. And so what that lets us do is create remote accounts, control those remote accounts, which all require action that happens over more than one block. And so a lot of the other folks that are building towards the chain abstraction direction are doing it from a fundamentally different perspective, and we will end up partnering with them because they might have a good solution for wallets or something along those lines. But they all will sort of need what we can do, which is this multi-step action process.
Rowland, you spoke at the start about your background in B2B SaaS. I'm really keen to hear what from that experience have you been able to port over to a Web3 product, and what have you had to leave behind?
Yeah, I'll start with what I had to leave behind because I think that's easier. I think that the move fast and break things mentality definitely, you could come up with something half baked and ship it the next day in B2B SaaS, and that's just not the case here. Not knowing your customers is difficult. So in B2B SaaS, I worked at sort of young startups and also more established startups. In more established startups, you've got existing customers. And so when you're launching a new product, you can go talk to them and say, okay, well, tell me what you want on this table. Tell me what you need. Whereas in this space, your customers are like anonymous frog pictures on the internet. And so you often don't have that kind of feedback, and you have a community that you can talk to, but you don't know how many of those people are actually users. You don't really know anything about them. And so that ends up being pretty difficult. The things that do translate and are helpful is that, for better or worse, a lot of the space is much younger. I'm in my mid 30s, and I'm pretty old to be working in blockchain. It turns out, not at Agoric, but in the general space. And so a lot of folks don't have like BD experience or customer account management experience or like experience in other professions. And so if you've been a product manager in B2B SaaS, you probably have a lot of work habits that set you apart from a decent portion of the blockchain space, right? You probably take notes really well. You probably are able to be structured and analytical around a partnership and how you sort of work forward with another organization. And that ends up being really useful because again, a lot of the space just doesn't have that. Try to think what else has translated really well.
Well, let me ask, for you've been through that interview process of coming into Web3, which, because of everything you spoke about, is a different interview process. What recommendations would you give for people wanting to lean into Web3 as the next career opportunity?
Yeah, and I've also hired a bunch of PMs in this and done a bunch of interviews as well on my end. And so the biggest advice I would give is use the products. Like, you'd be shocked at how many people want to come and build Web3 products and have never interacted. Like, you'd be shocked at how many people own no crypto, and that alone sort of, to me, if I'm hiring, it's like, okay, this is a tourist. This person is not going to go deep enough to really understand things. But the rabbit hole goes really deep in terms of how these protocols interact, how blockchains work. You need to really like and understand the details. And the biggest signal you can give to someone hiring is to have used a bunch of these Web3 products. So DeFi applications or games or whatever it might be, use them, learn how they work. If you find that you're like not interested enough to go do that, then you probably should do something else for your job, right? Like that, you're going to have to know that stuff. And a lot of my interview questions, at least for PMs, revolve around, okay, well, tell me about your favorite product that you've interacted with, and then I make them explain that product to me in a pretty deep level of depth.
Nice. Rowland, we've spoken a lot about how to do chain abstraction in a great way. I've got hopefully a parody video that's going to raise a smile.
Sure.
I want to roll this for everyone listening. This is the parody video around maybe why you shouldn't be looking at chain abstraction if you want a world of chaos. So let's roll this, and keen to see what you think, Rowland. Here we go.
You need to hear this if you're a blockchain wizard looking for more chaos in your life. Today we're tackling chain abstraction, because why make things simple when you can dive headfirst into a tangled web of chains? Forget seamless communication. Let's embrace the chaos. Reduced friction? Who needs it when you can have developers pulling their hair out trying to connect incompatible chains? And let's talk about Agoric. They're leading the charge with their orchestration API, but simplicity is overrated, right? Why make cross-chain interactions a breeze when you can keep everyone guessing? Keep those developers on their toes. Interoperability challenges? Bring them on. Why solve problems when you can create more? And user experience in DeFi? Let's keep it as confusing as possible, because who doesn't love a good puzzle when managing their assets? So if you're ready to complicate your blockchain journey, stick around. Stay tuned for more chaos.
So Rowland, chaos is the word there. Do you find that when you've got users coming in first hour using Agoric, is chaos the place that they're coming from?
Yes. And so one thing that's funny about that video is who doesn't love a puzzle when managing their assets? And I will actually say one of the challenges that the industry has is that the people that are in it currently are the ones that love a puzzle in managing their assets. Like the opacity and the difficulty and the learning curve was actually appealing for early Bitcoin users, for early crypto users and DeFi users. It was appealing for me, if I'm being honest. I liked it. I liked the puzzle. But we have hit saturation with a number of people in the world that want that. Like the people that want that are already in the space. And so if as an industry we want to become relevant to a wider set of people, we really do need to get past that and make it easy. And so, yeah, folks, builders, and again, from Agoric standpoint, our audience is builders. We are not primarily building end user applications, but we want to empower builders to do that. And the builders that are coming to us, the reason we're starting to get traction with the orchestration API is that builders are trying to do this elsewhere or trying to do this on their own and can't. And so they're already ramming their head against the wall on these problems that we did also. And they're coming to us because they have an ability to solve it here. And so we want to, that to me, that looks like product market fit. And so that's why we're continuing to push in this cross-chain direction, because that's sort of the big problem that we see in the space, and it's going to stay in the space until somebody solves it.
Awesome. I want to wrap up with a final question, Rowland. It wouldn't be a Web3 podcast if I didn't ask the question, who is Satoshi? Let us know.
It's not whoever that HBO documentary thought it was. I don't know. I think it's Dean Tribble, who is the CEO of Agoric. That's a more than 0% chance, probably less than 1%. But yeah, I think it was Hal Finney, but I've got no particular insight into that, and I hope that nobody ever finds out.
Yeah, that's the romance of it, is in the mystery. Rowland, thank you so much for this episode. As I said at the start, I was a little bit intimidated coming into this around the depths of everything that we were here to talk about, but actually I've really enjoyed this session, and the way you've explained and walked me through everything here has been fantastic. So thank you so much for your expertise and your knowledge.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you to everyone listening to this episode. My name is Jay Stansell. This has been a Product Coalition podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Product Coalition, head over to productcoalition.com, and you'll also find us over on Substack. Until the next episode, thank you.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansell. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.